Welcome to the Mint Door Podcast with Dr. Karen Tyndall and Dr. Laura Schwint.
Are you a high achiever feeling the burnout blues? Well, the Mint Door Podcast is your oasis. And before we introduce you to today's phenomenal guest, we're extending an invitation to something extraordinary. We're mixing up the perfect antidote to burnout with the Mint Julep newsletter, a weekly dose of inspiration delivered straight to your inbox. Each edition of the Mint Julep is more than just words on a page. It delivers connection, and it's brimming with inspiration, positivity, and a dash of fun. Think of it as your virtual happy hour with a supportive community of high achievers. We'll help you unwind, recharge, and rediscover the joy in every day. So subscribe to the Mint Julep and let's clink glasses or coffee mugs to live a more inspired, joyful life, 1 week at a time. And are you more of a visual learner? Well, we've got you covered. Did you know that all of our podcasts plus bite-sized coaching tips are on YouTube? We're at the Mint Door, so subscribe for happiness on the go. So now today, let's welcome to another episode of the Mint Door Podcast. Today, we're thrilled to introduce Kelly O. Burns, a dynamic leader in the field of somatics. Kelly is a book lover, wilderness adventurer, dedicated mother of 2 teenage sons, Soma coach, literacy researcher, yoga educator, and Soul School Facilitator. With over 25 years of experience, Kelly integrates somatic literacy, mindfulness, and the 8 limbs of yoga into her leadership and creativity work. She emphasizes liberatory somatic technologies to cultivate sustainable workplace culture and leadership design. Based in Fort Collins, Colorado, Kelly fosters community through her boutique studio and consulting company, Earth Eagle Somatics. Her commitment to lifelong learning and equity-based practices is evident in her impressive credentials and national and international retreats on embodied creativity and leadership. Currently, she is working on her forthcoming somatic guide to living, aptly titled Guts. So join us as we delve into a captivating conversation with Kelly O. Burns, exploring the transformative power of somatics, mindfulness, and embodied leadership. Get ready to feel energized, inspired, and uplifted by Kelly's wisdom and passion. Welcome to the Mint Door, Kelly. Mint Door podcast listeners, I am excited to bring you and honored to hold space for our guest today, Kelly O. Burns. Kelly, thank you so much for being here. We were just visiting for a few minutes about your beautiful studio and the beautiful backdrop that you have. So thank you for that, bringing that to us today. But welcome. We're super excited to hear from you.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, as I said in your introduction, first of all, you have done so many wonderful, cool things, and I just want to live vicariously through it all. And I'm so happy that you're sharing your gifts with the world. So, but to get right into it, what is somatic literacy? What are we talking about here? Because I think sometimes that's maybe a term that a lot of people aren't familiar with.
Yeah, great. Thanks for asking that.
Yeah.
So somatic literacy the root is somatic, and then the root before that is soma, which means body. And so it is the act of reading one's own body and being able to sharpen the skill sets required to do so that are a whole body skill set. I think the other piece of it is as you do that, like most things, you get better at reading other people's bodies and containers. So we live in community, we live in families, we live in workspaces, we live in lots of different places where there are other bodies. And so I think one of the gifts of somatic literacy is as you learn the strands and skills of reading your own embodied experience in the day-to-day business of life, and you learn then how to read others, how you engage changes. So the benefit of learning to read, just like we think about when our littles are going through a school and learning to read practice, we often say things like, oh, the whole world's going to open up to you. When the minute you learn how to decode language and you can pick the story up off the page, we tell students and kids that often, and it's not different. For anybody who's learning to read their own body is sort of like, oh, the whole world's going to open up to you. And it's true. And it sounds superfluous, and it's true. Because I think we've lived in a place that values sort of, I always say, neck up ways of being and doing. And so somatic literacy incorporates neck up, it incorporates the cognitive, but it also then reteaches us neck down. So what is happening in all of these other layers of our bodies? And we have, in lots of different spiritual traditions, we have names for layers of our bodies. Like there is an ancient precedent for studying and knowing parts of the body. So one of the traditions that I'm trained in is yoga practice, yoga philosophy. And in yoga, these are called koshas. And so they're sort of like Russian nesting dolls, as you can think about layers and layers and layers of the body experience. And there's some version of that in many spiritual traditions. So it can be a totally secular practice to learn somatic literacy, where you're like, I just need to understand my nervous system, right? Like, what is happening when this pressure is coming in and I'm having the specific reaction? And so it can be very secular in that way, where we often come to somatic literacy where there's some pressure, and it's often outside or abrupt, or it's through relationships or relational pressure. And we're having a reaction, a physical, a mental, and emotional reaction that we don't want to have. And so we learn to read, and we learn to correct some old rutted ways of being and acting and doing. So it gives us that gift of being able to understand what's happening, to give language to it. So naming things matters for us when we're trying to make meaning. And then also, when you learn somatic literacy, you learn, the big prize at the end is that, like, everything you need in order to change pattern behaviors that aren't serving you is already in you. Like, there's no sort of outside, like, and then if you just get this, it'll be better. It's all there. So that's the coolest gift, is that anybody doing somatic work with somebody, it's like your goal is to work yourself out of a job. It's just to teach that other body that it's already there, and just how to learn it and how to activate it. So that's my job, is just to teach people what it is, and help them kind of mirror back to them, like, what's happening when the pressure is coming in and they have a reaction. And then where are the other tools and things we can do to kind of rewire our responses through the nervous system, through physical practices, through emotional practices, through visualization practices. That's a really long answer to your question.
There's so much in there, so I'd love to just tease out a few things. First of all, for somebody that's curious, and maybe that's been explained for the first time to them, even though they know it intuitively, right? But they've gotten away from it, maybe.
Yes.
What would be one very first exercise or something that you would coach them through if they came to you and said, I want to explore this, but I have no idea what you're even talking about?
Absolutely. Yeah. So the first thing we always start with is a centering practice. And the reason why is because it takes you into all 4 dimensions of your body, and you can do it anywhere, and you can do it multiple times a day. And it takes about 5 minutes. It's a 5-minute practice. And it helps people understand that you could be centered and embodied and also have the experience you're having. So for instance, when you do embodiment work, you're not trying to make anything different than it is. You're trying to understand what's here and what it's in service of, and if it's still in service of that or not. And then you can make some changes. So a centering practice is always how we start. And it's very simple. You talk through training somebody to check in into their length dimension. So you literally work from crown to toe. So we would talk through language about lengthening through the spine. And each of the centering dimensions has an embodiment, like a physicality to it, and also like a socio-emotional piece to it. So this is neurophysiological. So we work in the lengthening dimension, and we think, what would it feel like to be taller? And what do? We usually lengthen from our spine, from crown to toe. And then we let our body soften into that support, but with more length. The socio-emotional piece of that one is to, like, check into your dignity. I mean, when you're lengthened, you put your hands on your belly and think, oh, there I am. that's me in my full, I added a shimmy to my to my lengthening because I'm like, oh, there I am. I know you do Peloton too, Laura. When Robin Arzón says, adjust your crown, and you're like, oh yes, ma'am. And there's something that happens, right? When you're on the bike and you're like, I am adjusting my crown. And that's the lengthening dimension, right? So then we go into width. And we say, okay, take your wings out and feel your body grow wide. Feel the side body, feel your heart expand. And in the width dimension, the piece that you bring in that's more than physical is the sense of interconnectedness. So not only are you this solid being, but you're also in community. And there is community around you. You live in spaces where there are other people, and to bring that support in. So I always think about like someone having their arm in my left arm and someone having their arm in my right arm. And that support of being interconnected. And then the third is depth. So you bisect from heart to back and back to heart. And so you breathe as though you're breathing back to front and front to back. And the piece that you bring in there is support that's at your back that you cannot see, right? So you might think about any kind of secular or spiritual tradition where there is something larger than you that is breathing you in, that is holding you, that is an awareness that is at your center and also surrounding you. So it's sort of this idea, and in secular mindfulness, we always say light touch, lean back. And it's this idea of like, you can lean back a little and it keeps you from contraction, where you're like literally like the hunched over, like tightening. So that is the depth dimension. And the fourth one is to come to your commitment. So you bring hands really physically to your center and you realign with what you are a commitment to. And this is language from Stacey Haynes, who's one of my teachers from the Strassi Institute, but this is sort of foundational somatics practice. And you say out loud, if you're in the workplace, you can say it to yourself if it's weird to say that. But sometimes it's powerful to open the vocal channel and say, today I'm a commitment to peace in this workspace. Today I'm a commitment to my purpose, which is to help people get well, to help empower people with knowledge about whatever you do, right? So the fourth dimension is to come to your own center with your hands at your belly and say, I'm a commitment to what? And sometimes that shifts depending on context of where you are. So we always start there, that wherever you are, the centering practice is available. I just had a client the other day say, I was at the airport preparing for travel, which like my Dharma teacher always says, family is the last frontier. And she was like going to family, like reunion situation. I was like, ooh, girl, you better prepare yourself. So she was like, I was doing my centering practice over and over and over again in the airport. And like, no one has to know. It can be very private, but also you can invite people in. It's a secular practice, and it's just about coming back into this container and all the dimensions of it. Sometimes we add a fifth dimension, and that's hands out of gratitude. And we know the power, I know that this is one of your areas of expertise. We know the neurophysiological power of holding gratitude closely right at the front of our experience. And so when you have your hands out, you can add that fifth dimension and just remember what you're grateful for, what is here for you. And that's really a loving addition too.
That is beautiful. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, it is beautiful. And it's not mine. It just comes from a long lineage, but it's so simple. And that's the thing. It's like once your listeners listen to this centering practice, now it's theirs and they have it and you take it with you. It's portable. Yeah.
Well, and that's another thing you alluded to is as a somatic coach, you want to work yourself out of a job, right?
Yes. Yes.
And I think that right there is such a powerful statement in that you're just there to support and hold and help your clients remember.
That's it. It's the coming back to your center. Sort of the whole process of somatic coaching is like wrapped up in that one phrase, like, what are you a commitment to? And oftentimes when people come to me, it's relational or work-based, where they're feeling like there's some barrier between what they're actually experiencing and what they're a commitment to.
Mm.
And it's cool to work through that with your body, because a lot of the ways in which we deal with barriers in our lives feel like our body's not our ally. It feels like we're either disembodied, we don't view it as a tool that could be of use, or it sometimes feels like part of the barrier. Relational work stuff often has to do with how we behave in conflict, the choices we make when tension arises, the choices we make relationally with colleagues or with partners or with our children. So it's really interesting to consider that what you bring with you into all of those barriers is your greatest ally.
Mm.
And sometimes we just need to, learn the technology that we've forgotten or that we weren't overtly taught, for how to activate that body as an ally. But it is our ally.
Mm-hmm. Okay, again, so much to unravel there. So you said a lot of times it's the stress or the resistance that brings people to somatics, but what about the joy and the pleasure of it? What, if you get past that, where do we tap in there with somatics?
I love that. Yeah. I was working with a client the other day, and what came about was her deep longing.
Mm-hmm.
And our longing is attached to our joy and our delight. And it's always attached to what we're a commitment to. And so when we have put everything else in front of our own longing, it feels almost impossible to access our joy.
Mm.
Right? And our delight, and like even the body's own experiences, like dancing or movement or breath or eating, like these simple pleasures that are full of delight that the body is partnering us through in a day, we lose when we lose our longing, when we lose sight of that. And so one of the doorways into joy, which is the most important part of transformation, I just have to I'm so grateful for that question, because joy is at our center, right? It's our birthright. Pema Chodron, one of my favorite teachers, calls it bodhicitta, like the heart, the awakened heart. That is a state of joy. And the Dalai Lama says that Westerners have a hard time with the word happy, like the concept of happiness, because we have this weird, we think that it's like spring break 2024. Like we think happiness means just insane, like these weird extreme, but actually joy, delight, happiness is this sensation of contentment, of being totally content with the simple senses that arise and fall. And so our longing in us arises and falls every day if we are aware that it's there. So part of the somatic access to that is what's in your longing? What's in that heart center? What's in your belly? What are you putting your hands in when you make something and do something creative? How does your body move? We literally do a practice where we just walk across the room and we watch how our bodies move. And if our bodies are moving with this forward, we're often missing our longing, our joy, and our delight because we're in the future. We're future thinking, we're catastrophizing, we're planning, we're listing. None of those are bad, but they are harmful if we're in them all the time without any balance, right? So they all serve a real purpose. They keep us safe, they keep us in our dignity, they keep us belonging in a workspace where we have lots of responsibility. But we can overcorrect. I'm a queen of overcorrection, of the forward hunch walk, just like Miss Piggy in her high heels, we gotta go, we're in a hurry, just efficiency, and
right there.
Right?
Right there.
We talked about this, highly achieving women, highly achieving humans, that is rewarded. So it's hard to change that behavior because there's a lot of reward for it. So sometimes we'll watch someone walk across a room and we'll see them just completely collapsed. And that has its own block to your own longing, where it's sort of like there's layers of being so armored and so closed off that we cannot show up in a space where we would even want to see that. It feels too painful, or there's grief associated with it, or we've had to shut down some part of ourselves, right? And sometimes we'll see people walk where they are just completely out of the act of walking, like they're in another world and they're not here now. So that there are practices where we're just working with the body and we can start to get clues and information. Another way that we get information about joy and delight and kind of what's a barrier to it is when pressures come at you, like how your body's responding with those conditioned tendencies. And when we can say, what does that conditioned tendency really serve? How has that kept you safe? How has that kept you in your dignity? How has that kept you in your belonging? We can honor it and then think, does it still serve? Is our longing kind of getting stuck somewhere in there where we can't access it? Right, well, let's try some different conditions. Let's condition into a different tendency. And so then that's what we do in our coaching. And it can feel so joyful, even to move out of a rut of like, even to change how you walk. You're like, oh my God. Like I have a client who I was like, she has a Beyonce practice where I was like, once a week, you have to do your Beyonce walk because she's learning how to be in her feminine body. And she spent a lot of time closing it off because it was unsafe. Her physicality made being in that body unsafe because of the color of her skin, because of her female figure that's hypersexualized in spaces where she was. And so as she's learning to embody her own power and decide if the context of the space is safe for her, she's practicing her Beyonce, which is just code for like being in your full feminine body and opening your heart and chest up to that. Mm-hmm. And like, she texts me when she chooses her Beyonce day. And she's like, oh my gosh, today was a great day.
Oh,
it feels so different. And that is joyful.
Mm-hmm. What a gift.
I have some long answers.
No, these are beautiful. These are beautiful. And I think that our listeners will really appreciate the long answers and the stories, and because it really does bring context to it that is understandable. But okay, another bookmark and I'm really proud of myself for remembering this one. But
I know, I'm proud of you too.
You said that once you start opening up yourself to this, then you can start reading other people. And so important in our world because, with families and with work families and in community, how does that then start to help in those closed containers when you start recognizing this in others?
Oh my gosh. I'm so glad you asked that question because this is the role of somatics in the workplace, right? This is why these two seemingly odd partners are a perfect fit, this intersectionality. And we talked about paradox. It's a paradox. So why this matters is for empathy and dignity. So when you are in community with other people, people stay in community where they feel safe, where they belong, and they can be in their dignity. And they inherently, in those three things, they grow. So when we are in workspaces where one of those or two of those or all three of those are threatened or missing, tension, conflict, all of that is accentuated, accelerated, and becomes the drama of our lives, right? It becomes a toxic, psychologically unsafe, sometimes even physically unsafe place to be. And most of the time in a workplace, no one's creating that intentionally. No one is creating unsafe, undignified, and not belonging spaces on purpose.
Right.
So the gift of somatics is as you start to do the work yourself, you see, one, the responsibility you have in maintaining that contextually for others. Like, okay, what's my responsibility to make sure that I am creating containers and contexts where other people have access to their dignity and their belonging and their safety here. And if I have violated that through a policy, a practice, or an interaction, somatics gives me a practice to repair it. It gives me a practice to say, hey, there's tension and conflict here that's old and long and deep. And I'm learning about my contribution to that. And I want to repair it with you. Or I want to repair it by changing this policy that is inhumane and undignified and only serves 2% of our population in this workplace, and the rest of the people feel totally violated by it. Do you know what I mean? So what you start to do is you are able to hold up the mirror in a way that your ego gets checked. So one of the strands of somatic literacy is work with the ego. And we all have it, and the ego keeps us safe in a lot of ways. But in order for our workplaces to be safe and dignified and belonging for other people, we have to do work with our ego. And then we model that for the people we work with and lead. And we use different language. And we use a phrase that my friend Jeff says, we just rat ourselves out, which is my favorite phrase. Like, I'm just going to rat myself out. Like, ooh, I caught some nasty behavior or thinking. And I am just going to, I'm going to love myself through that. So the somatic practices, I can hold that noticing of behavior, and I can hold warmth. And when we cannot do that for ourselves, we cannot do that for others. So we might be leading organizations, we might be leading businesses and expecting certain behaviors, practices to be in place. But if we are guiding and leading from a place where there is no warmth, where there is no empathy, and where there is no dignity, because we don't have it for ourselves, we are not going to get those results in the workplace. And we'll just keep spending money, time, and energy banging heads against the wall. And it doesn't work. People leave, there's drama, there's stress, and it's often unnecessary. So one of the things that I love about this practice is that we don't have any formal training in conflict and tension. Most of us. Right? We're just like, oh my God, we just have armor that we do. And I have a whole list of armor. I have to show you this, Laura. I just have this in my studio. It's like all of the armor. And I just read from the list, and people are like, yep. So
will you read a couple for us? Read a couple.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And literally there's a sticky note on my sheet that says, this is from my own learning, that says, oh, these are many of these behaviors I engage in, right? Like no one gets the pass from armor. It's just how we've kept ourselves safe with conflict and tension. So it's served us in a way where it's like, no. So here's some of them. Okay. Perfectionism. Just like everybody who's listening, just keep being cold or unapproachable. Controlling or micromanaging others. That's one of my signature strengths in armor.
Mine too.
We talked about this earlier. Always knowing everything is a form of armor. Being competitive. Saying you're sorry too often. Sarcasm and cynicism. Oh, this is one I do too. Pretending I don't care. When things are good, expecting failure. People pleasing. Overcommitting. Gossiping, triangulating, back channeling. Always being busy. Judging or criticizing others. Trying to be invisible, hiding and avoiding. It just goes on. And they all relate to our nervous system. It's like whether you do fawn, flight, fight, or freeze is how you will armor. Because we've not been taught the skills for tension and conflict. So one of the gifts of somatics in a workplace and a relationship or a family is that we start often there. And it starts with how you do it with yourself.
Well, it's just that saying, like, it all starts with you. Everything always starts with you.
It always starts with us.
This has to be so valuable. Like,
it feels like it to me. It definitely feels like it to me. And it's cool to see people and places and contexts change. But I do think it's important to note it can also feel threatening, right? When we have institutions that are built on armor, when we have spaces, contexts, workplaces that are built on transactions that will require us to armor up, and then policies and practices in place that uphold that. To go into this space can feel alarming, it can feel dangerous, it can feel scary. And so just naming and noticing that it's a revolutionary act to be embodied in your leadership. It's a revolutionary act, which means you're changing a system. And many of us can feel that our systems need to change, but we don't know the how. And this is one of the hows.
So do you find more companies, more businesses, more families being open to this? Do you see a shift? Do you see the tide turning this way?
Yeah, I do in certain sectors. And oftentimes it starts with, there's two ways that I'm experiencing it right now. One is in institutions that are top down, and organizations that operate in sort of a hierarchical, kind of like a dinosaur version of, an older, outdated maybe model of hierarchy. It's oftentimes people who are like plebeian, like the people who are like boots on the ground doing the work, who are enjoying and employing these practices together collectively and then moving them up a system, which is cool.
That's cool.
And can be exhausting and hard if you are met with, outdated practices that want to maintain something different. And then the other ways that I see this in organizations, I'm working with a couple clients now who are women entrepreneurs, a couple women dentists, a powerful woman who's she's a real estate broker for this huge brokerage. And it starts with an individual who starts doing the practice privately, like who comes for Soma coaching because they have something personal. And then they're like, wait a minute, this could help my work. And you're like, yes, it's not different. Because work is made up of humans. And we're all in there just bumping up against each other with all of our big hearts.
All our big hearts and all of our armor, right?
And all of our armor. Just trying to I've just visualized this all like coming to kindergarten, and it's sort of like just looking around, trying to figure it out. We just have different costumes on, but it's not really different. So that's kind of the two things that I'm experiencing now is like groups of people who are like, this is so powerful. Some ways is like in a restorative practice in organizations, like we need language for conflict, language for repair, and then we move somatics into that. A lot of movements of change that came in the Black Lives Matter and the Me Too movement are empowering somatics for people who are making changes in systems and laws. And then personally for me, it's been a lot of individual one-on-one coaching with people who are powerful, who are leaders, and thinking, I want to try this in my workspace. And then can you come in and work with our teams? Absolutely, yes. Yeah.
Well, just listening to you, you kind of gave some verbiage there. It was just so heart opening, and it just felt so to hear that just feels so refreshing. And
it's so refreshing.
Yeah. And I just think that we can just get so busy doing and miss out on this piece of beautiful refreshment of dealing with all the doing that we've done.
Yeah. Yes. I mean, one of my favorite teachers, David White, who's a poet and a philosopher, has a book called The Heart Aroused. And it's about, embodiment work and in the workplace. And he does a lot of work with big organizations. It's like coming back to your center, coming back to a deeper well is the language that he uses. Like we all have a deeper well that we can drink from. And when our workspaces feel that way, we are productive, we are collaborative, we are innovative, we are creative, we are heart-centered. And a lot of us have these kind of statements on our visions or our values, for workplaces, but it actually feels that way. And the dissonance closes between what we say we stand for and then what we're actually doing.
Oh, you know, I think that's huge, because that is a piece of fulfillment or lack of fulfillment for a lot of people, is
Yeah.
when they believe in something but they aren't acting it.
Yes. Yeah. So one of my favorite teachers, I met her at a wellness ranch a long time ago. Her name's Ann Vandewater, and she presented me with a tree of alignment. And I always share that with clients. And it's a really good visual, might be for some of your listeners, where you have three sections of the tree. You have your roots, you have your trunk, and you have your branches. And the roots are our values and visions. And this can be for an individual or for an organization. So what are our values? What are our vision? What do we stand by? What are our commitments? In Somatic, we call it, what are your declarations? The trunk are your practices to move those up. So like, what are the practices, the policies that we have in place that move these values up into our living branches? Right? Because the living branches are like our relationships, how we interact, our money, our bottom lines, our career trajectories, our ongoing, our revenue streams. Like those are the actual like concrete things that when we're in a life that we deal with and that matter. And so when the branches are not where we want them to be, we can feel victimized. We can be like, oh man, we're just never going to make the money that we need. We're never going to reach the clients that we want. And what's missing are the trunk practices that move those values up. And somatics, I believe, are some of the most powerful practices that move your values and visions up into the branches of your tree. Doesn't that make sense? It's
That's
like, yeah,
such a good visual.
it's so helpful.
Yes.
It's so helpful. And it's not mine, but I use it. And I always say thank you to my teachers. Like, thank you, Ann Vandewater, because that changed my life. And the other thing it does is it moves you out of the shadow of being a victim. And no matter if that's personal or professional, we've all felt that way, where it's like, no matter what I do, it doesn't change. And it turns out you're missing some trunk practices that will shift it. And it's like, oh, that's so empowering. I could do something.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. That's radically so cool.
It's so cool. I'm sure she has images online. It's called like the tree of authentic alignment. And I always draw it on my whiteboard over here with like some crazy, and you can add your own extra branches. Everybody should have that up. So you can be like, oh, I need to change my practices because I'm trying to move a specific branch, and sometimes our branches shift without our consent. Like we can experience a disease or a death or a loss of a job. And if we don't have those trunk practices in place to help us regrow the branch or change it, again, we feel victimized. We can feel like there's no way to move forward in our dignity. And that's not true. We just need some support sometimes.
Gosh, thank you. That's gorgeous.
Yeah.
And I love how you referenced it to creativity and problem solving and innovation. Because I think that in our world today, we need a lot of that.
Yes, ma'am.
And not only that, but I think people feel when they're creative and innovative and collaborative, I feel like they feel more alive, like in flow and, putting something out into the world. And so I love how this fosters that and enhances that and encourages that.
Absolutely. When you move closer to the thing that you've been avoiding or that is a barrier, right? When you move really close to that with a lot of warmth and a lot of empathy and a lot of compassion for yourself, what is on the other side of that moving closer is your aliveness. I just met this poet named Micheál O'Sullivan in Ireland, and he actually, I think I have his, I brought it up. I have his poetry book here. But he inscripted it to me, to Kelly, the most alive thing. And I was like, that's the most beautiful epithet that anyone's ever given me. And that is the feeling when you're embodied. It is being the most alive thing. that keeps you healthy. It keeps you attracting relationships and opportunities that meet you energetically with the same kind of aliveness that you are. And it's really interesting to live in a body that feels alive when we are often used to being in a container that feels like heavy, and like we're dragging it with us.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I suppose that once you feel it, then when you're not feeling it and you want to get back to feeling it, right?
Yeah.
So, and I think that's a really important piece of awareness too, is that, just because you get it once doesn't mean you've arrived and you're going to stay there.
No, it's interesting. I've been studying this archetype. I'm going to do a class on the heroine's journey. And Joseph Campbell had, like most of us know, like Joseph Campbell, the hero's journey. And he had a female protege that was like, I don't think women do this. And he said to his female protege, you're right. They don't. They have a different journey. In the feminine, they start from the center and they labyrinth out and come back in, and labyrinth out and come back in. The hero's journey is a circle, and the heroine's journey is a starting at the center and a labyrinthing, like a spiral, which is like also an indigenous image. So it's constantly the coming back and the attuning in and the moving toward your center, and the trust and the listening, the instinctual knowing, the wildness that's in you. And when we say the heroine's journey, we have this, this sort of like immediate, like, oh, that's just for women. But really, it's just the feminine piece of all of us, that feminine way of being that we have, different than our masculine energy. So I love that idea of like the touching in, and you're going to be knocked off your center. There's things that are going to happen that force you to grow, as they should. Sometimes I work with people in deep grief, and I always joke, that's one of my armors, joking. Making things humorous is an armor piece, but I do it often. And I always say, oh, grief, my oldest friend, because I've lived with a lot of grief in my life. But grief is a place where you can feel very alive. One of the gifts of grief is that it attunes you to your senses. And you feel everything, like your pores are way more open. Is it the pathway we would like? Usually not. But it does give us access to our aliveness, and we can hold that in our bodies with power.
That's really beautiful, because the duality of that is just gorgeous,
Yeah.
So many times people want to move out of that as fast as possible, but yet if you look at it as how beautiful it is, and how alive you feel, maybe you just want to sit in it for a bit.
This beautiful Irish poet, John O'Donoghue, who passed away too early. I think he was 52 when he died, but he was just coming into his own, and he just has the most beautiful collection of writing. But one of the things he says about grief is it's like a wall in Ireland where there's space in the stones. And that is where you can see all the way through the wall. And I love to think of grief like that, where it's like, don't move through that too fast. It has so much to teach you. And let the sensation of it sort of pick your bones. Be a bone picker in that way. Like, dig into the flesh that's there and the life that's there when you're in your grief, and look through that hole and don't turn from it. And we just don't have the cultural structures that know how to hold people with that, because if we did, it would be like, you shouldn't have to work. Like you shouldn't have to like go into work while you're doing that. You shouldn't have to go to the grocery store. There should just be this big, deep care where you can really go into the cave of grief and be with it, because it requires all of you.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you're so right that so often, boom, the next day you're back to work and doing all the things, and
And people don't know how to talk about it, so they ignore it or ignore you. And then it feels like so isolating and lonely.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, oh my gosh, what am I doing on a spreadsheet while I'm like trying to like grieve? It just feels absurd. It's absurd. And if
It
we
is.
had workplaces where it was like, you are grieving, take what you need. If this spreadsheet seems absurd, walk away, take a while. All the love that we can give each other when we're having our human experience. And we have language for that in our workplaces, it would feel different to be a human in them.
Oh, for sure. And I think that that's where this is so important, is this embodiment that begins with you, that we bring then into our workplace, that then just shifts into, the more balance of that masculine and feminine piece.
Yes. Yeah.
To just save space for that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And
we can feel it.
hmm,
We can feel it. We also have clients that maybe come into our workspaces who can also feel it.
mm-hmm. Well, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. We talk a lot about that. It's just the energy of your place. And that some people may not know that they're feeling that, but it's there.
It's there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, if we think about how much we transmit with our hands, in somatics, we do this. This is a cool practice where we talk about how we react with a conditioned tendency is like to constrict.
Mm-hmm.
And one practice is to like go in with the other hand and try to pull it apart. And the first thing your fist does is constrict harder.
Mm-hmm.
When you come in with a warm and open hand and you put it on top, the first thing this fist does is sort of soften.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what our clients' bodies or our employees' bodies are doing in a place where dignity, safety, or belonging are missing. Mm-hmm. And we layer in, right? So we're just creating a lot of like closed fit. This is the metaphor for contraction, constriction, no communication. Mm-hmm. And when we offer the warm hand, or the metaphor of that, which is some embodied practices, some embodied leadership, the fist lightens, it opens. Mm-hmm. And people can feel it when they're in there, when they're in our workspace.
Mm-hmm. Thank you again for that visual. That is a really great visual.
Yeah. And you can do it to yourself too. You're like, oh, I'm doing the thing where I'm double downing. I'm the queen of the double down. Mm-hmm. And like my practice is just catching it earlier and earlier.
Right.
I don't know if I will ever. I mean, I'm 45 years old. I'll be 46 this year. I don't know if I'll ever start with just, I go right to the warm hand. That would be lovely, but I'm not there. Mm-hmm. And any teacher that tells me they are and they start, I don't believe it. I think I just don't. You know, like I've got some criticality, but I think we tell the truth and rat ourselves out about the time that it takes us to catch that mindfulness practice of catching when we come in with the double down, you know, and then being really warm with ourselves and be like, oh, I was doing that thing again that I do. That doesn't work.
You know, just even saying that feels so good. Like just acknowledging it and being like human about it. Yeah. Oh, that was the dumb thing I do. Or that was the thing that I think works, but it never does.
It never works. Really sorry about that, y'all. I'm gonna do a redo. You know, a lot of us as parents have practiced like the U-turn or the redo, where it's like, let's just try that again. Let's just go ahead and do that whole scenario over. And one of the things I've learned as a parent is that most of your connection and your attachment happens in the repair. You know, it happens. You create attachment when you say, "Ooh, that was rough. I'm going to try again," and I apologize, and I'm learning something different. And I have to believe, without looking at the social science in the workplace, that it's true with adults too. That when we come together and say, I did not handle that the way that kept my dignity. And I understand it probably sacrificed yours too. Let's try it again. I mean, what a revolution.
Right. I just, you know, when you say those beautiful phrases, I immediately go back in my life to, you know, ways I behaved or ways I was treated. And I can just feel like if I would have had that language, or someone would have said that language to me, how it would have repaired and attached, and it would have changed the outcome so much quicker.
Yeah. Yeah. And we can build trust again.
Mm-hmm.
And we can sometimes build trust for the first time.
Yes.
And like learning how to do that in families and workspaces and relationships. Again, I wasn't taught that. I mean, maybe some other people really got good trust building, but there are some real intentional physical practices and language-based practices that build trust that we can do.
Mm-hmm.
And we are going to be way more efficient and way more powerful and way more creative when that exists.
Yeah. All right. So everything you said here has been absolutely amazing. And I'm going to have to play it back and take notes on it, because it's been just full of wisdom and pearls. So thank you for that. But I'm curious, Soma coaching and combining that with, you have something called Guts Creative Writing Circle. Can you explain?
Yeah, it's so fun. So Soma coaching I do here in the studio and also virtually online. I'm working with a couple of international clients recently, which has been so fun to be like, we're even doing Soma coaching in Spain and in Ireland. And it's just so cool that the energy transfers virtually is still, I know we learned it during COVID, but I'm a slow learner and I just think it's so cool.
It is cool.
So we just do this work, right? Where we meet and we talk through, and I teach people the tools of somatics and work with kind of what's present, what's acutely present, and then sometimes what's complexly present, what's been present for a long time, kind of right under the skin. And oftentimes those are personal, but sometimes they're professional, and we can go into the organizational spaces and do embodied practices for leadership, dignity. This is, I do always like to say, this is equity work, you know? So when we're thinking about making our spaces more equitable, we are doing this work. That's what this work is. When you're keeping people in their humanity and their dignity, that is the foundation of equity work. So when it says on my LinkedIn profile, equity literacy, that's what this is. It's like you're learning how to honor people's humanity. And that's about way more than race, culture, and ethnicity. Those are included, but this is the foundation to it. So that somatic coaching I do here, we do online, and then Guts Embodied Creativity and Writing has been so cool. Guts is the title of a forthcoming book that I'm working on, but it's this sort of like play on words, because creativity has to include play. Which, side note, if you're like a survivor of trauma, play is the worst. You're just like, no thanks, I'm good. Like, we're usually not good at play. It's just like, you guys do it and I'll be over here making a list. You know what I mean? Like, it's just, so like a lot of us have to learn play. Like, I remember having my little kids be like, Mom, can you play? And I was like, nope, I don't really love it. So it comes out of learning how to play as a precursor to creativity. So it is a circle that's starting again in August that will be up on my site, where we do it virtually and in person, where we work with writing as the artistic, like the creative medium, but it could be anything. It could be knitting. It could be, a lot of people are they do dance, but we're just moving through creative practices to understand and get clear about your own internal center. So Guts has a play on words where it means courage, but it also means literally your inside. Like when it's like, I felt that from my gut. It's always from the center. Nobody's ever like, I felt that from my elbow, right? Oh, I felt that from my fingertip. It's like, I felt that in my gut. And so it's this place of courage and clarity. And when you work with courage and clarity, your creativity just sort of opens like fire. So it's a writing circle that we'll do. I just did it last spring and it was so cool. And we've got people working on essays. We've got people working on books. We've got people doing cartoons. We've got poets. We had a woman that came that was like, I don't really write ever, but I just dance, but I want to be in this. And we're like, yep, that is a creative medium. So it's just helping people realign with that and to understand that it is our life force. It's our soul force, in the words of Gandhi, aparagrahi. It was the language that he used. Like, that's your soul.
Mhm.
And when that light has been dim for a long time, it doesn't really feel like living.
Oh. So is that something virtual or is that in person?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. So I will do in the spring, it was just in person, but we had so many people like, can you please do that virtual?
Mhm.
So I am going to host it and it will be coming out on dates that are finalizing now, starting at the end of August. It's just a once a month virtual of meeting. And you get, so what we do, we'll do some embodiment practices. We'll do a little bit of a somatic learning, like always a always a portable practice for you to take with you. And then time to share and for writers, some craft moves. What is a piece that we can work into our writing that matters? I do a lot of really cool, I'm grateful, I'm privileged to do a lot of work with writers in Guatemala every year. So it comes from this like work that I've done in Guatemala that I'm just bringing into this online space. And I am resistant to online, but I'm learning it works.
Mm.
And so that's cool. I'm trying to remain open and curious with it because it is possible.
Mhm.
So it is, yeah,
Awesome.
I'll have information out where people can join us.
Okay, fantastic. So,
Yeah.
we'll obviously put your website in our show notes, but it's eartheaglesomatics.com, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And
Okay.
it's undergoing some change. So there'll be
Okay.
a new one soon.
Oh,
Yeah.
yay. Well, this will
Yeah.
come out for a little bit, so maybe it'll be new
Yeah.
by the time we put it out. So that's
Yeah.
awesome. Um,
Yeah.
but tell me, okay, you have something there called the Somatic Literacy Rope Model. Can you tell me
Yeah.
what that is and what people would get with that?
Absolutely. Yeah. So the literacy rope model is um, it is part of my background is an academic researcher in literacy acquisition work. So the brain of mine that has worked in higher ed and worked at the university teaches the skilled rope model, and it's from Linnea Scarborough, and she's the original researcher of that for how people learn to read. So for 20 years, I've been teaching this rope model to teachers, to educators, to students, to pre-service teachers. Like, here are the things that reading is rocket science. You don't just pick it up. It's a skilled learning. And it's important that we teach everyone how to do it because it's an act of civic engagement and liberation. And so I believe deeply in literacy and the ability to read. And I just had this moment over time where I was like, it's not different for the body. And I started mapping all these somatic practices onto the same rope model. And so the rope model for somatic literacy is this research based model that I've spent about a decade building and is still kind of shifting as I'm learning more and more with people and in practices that so the bottom part of the rope model are the foundational strands that no matter what you have to have before you grow your depth of understanding. And so the foundational practices are things like mindfulness practices. So it's like you have to have an awareness practice to start to understand what's happening, and knowing the time's doorways. So there's some three foundational strands. And then the upper strands of the rope model are just like in the literacy rope model, where they are the things that will build your comprehension and depth that you can continually spiral around over time for deeper understanding and deeper meaning, just like we do as readers. When we're reading a text, those are things like being able to understand our broader vocabulary, being able to build on our background knowledge. Those things grow us as readers of any information. And in somatic literacy, some of those sort of strands on the upper part of the rope are things like working with the ego. Like, side note, big bummer, but that's never done. You know what I mean? Like, same thing with growing our vocabulary. Side note, we're never going to be like, well, we got all the words we need, so we're good.
Right.
So I just kept seeing all these similarities, and it's sort of the coolest thing of my life to have the intersection be true. And I just keep testing it. So as a researcher, that's all you always do. You're like, I'm just testing. And sometimes it's like, no, this one doesn't hold anymore. So let's pull it. But what is showing up in the data? So that's the rope model. And I always share it broadly and widely with people because they may have pieces of those strands already, but be missing some of the others and think, oh, that's a practice that I need to grow my depth and complexity with. And then they can. And there's lots of ways to grow your practice, right? You can take on a contemplative practice, a martial art. You can take on a meditation practice. Like, there are many doorways in.
Mm.
And I'm always weary of any practice that's like, there's one way in and one way out. No.
Right.
There's many doorways in. And so it's just a model that helps people see, where can I enter?
Mm.
And at different parts of your life, you'll need to enter in different ways,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
So for working parents that have very little time, a 5-minute meditation a day, that's perfect.
Mm-hmm.
Start there.
Mm-hmm.
And the Maggie Wheatley quote that's like, wherever you go, there you are. It's a perfect place to start.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the rope model. And it's always changing, and it's always never going to change. Like, it's still always going to have the foundational pieces and the ones that spin and grow with depth. So I always share those with people. And it kind of becomes like the arc of where we, where do you want to begin?
Mm-hmm. That's beautiful. I really appreciate that you share that. And I love that you found that connection between reading and somatics, just like, because, everything is connected, right? And so to just even to bring that into connection is and the fact that it's always changing, because nothing is ever not changing, right?
That's right. And that it's about your liberation.
Yeah.
When I think about my purpose, I have a friend, Chuck, who's helping me. He's so helpful. He's a loving, kind teacher. About my own purpose, it's about liberation. And it's about the Toni Morrison quote of like, once you have your freedom, your job is to help everyone else be free. And I do think that's true about the act of reading. I mean, when we think about people who've been enslaved, one of the first skills that was withheld from them was the ability to read and write. And that is intentional, right? So being able to read your container and what's happening with non-judgmental awareness and with a lot of warmth is an act of freedom. And it will change how you treat yourself.
And then that will change how you treat the world.
Yeah.
And how you see the world.
Yeah.
I've loved this conversation. I can't
Me
tell you
too.
how meaningful it is. So I would just like to thank you for spending some time to share all your gifts with us in your beautiful studio.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for having me, Laura. And thanks to your listeners for caring and doing this work in their lives, because they're awake, and that matters.
Yeah. So if this sparks some curiosity in you, please check out Kelly's website, give her a contact call, and explore more, because at least get the rope model, because that's, a great place to look into what doorways are available, and
that's right.
You can begin. So again, it's eartheaglesomatics.com. And fantastic. Well, thank you so much. I know that our listeners found a lot of encouragement, and we just adore you. So thank you for spending some time on the Knit Door podcast today, Kelly.
Thank you, Laura. Have a great one.
Yeah, you too.
We adore our listeners. Connect with us at themintdoor.net.